welcome to the video lecture for the Murrell chapter on traditions of African American education. I just want to start off by saying that the great late educator, A.C.G. Hilliard once said that you should never begin African American history by talking about slavery first, because that's not where the history starts. The history is much more far-reaching than that, and really stems back and originates from the richness of the continent of Africa. And I think that class didn't start there either. I definitely told you folks about being a strong link between African systems and indigenous systems, and not sort of positioning school as this primary education, but rather seeing education as a way of life, and seeing the elders as being a very crucial part to passing down tradition, but then also the passing down of skills, passing down of cultural practices, and the passing down of philosophies that were very integral to each given culture and ethnic group, which was just as vast and just as as indigenous societies as well. Really important because I thought oftentimes American history, when it does pay attention to African American history, does start with slavery, and doesn't sort of turn back the pages of time, really acknowledge that there are greater and more rich history sort of before that year. Also, the when sort of looking at this chapter and then thinking about slavery as an institution as a learning, and also think about the fact that majority of the slaves that were sort of distributed during the slave trade were not brought here. Of the African diaspora. Let me sort of explain what African diaspora means. Diaspora sort of translates into the dispersal of, and we've had different diasporas and sort of different ethnic groups given different migrations like slavery or economic climates or political climates. We can think of Jewish diaspora, which happened during the Holocaust. The Chinese diaspora sort of had different waves given political and economic times within China. Our interest in the African diaspora help sort of think about how this dispersal, similar to the Holocaust, was forced, and that this dispersal didn't just mean that Africans were brought here to the United States, but that they were brought to the Caribbean, and that they were brought to Latin America, some parts of Asia as well. About 50% of all Africans that were brought another land were brought to Brazil, and that's seen in the statistic, or rather the number that Brazil currently still has, which is the highest number of Africans outside of continent. 2/3 of Africans will be taken to the Caribbean, which is why we see many people in both Jamaica and Puerto Rico and Haiti and Dominican Republic have such a range of different racial categories. It's because of the African diaspora, and because each of those islands have a very strong African history. And less thirds were actually brought here to the States. Less than 2, which I think is surprising for folks, because again, oftentimes the way that we're taught to that the Atlantic slave trade had a huge concentration here in the States, and that's not necessarily true. It becomes important for others to sort of think about what it means to have a diverse group of Africans brought here to the state, because of the difference in language, the difference in belief, and the difference in cultural practices. Ask that question in the free write: what Africans learn in slavery and not allowed to learn? Those 3 things become really important for us to sort of consider, along with sort of learning labor, with sort of hearing some of these epithets and sort of other gruesome and horrific, and along with the the violence that was in general. What wasn't being learning was sort of the original ways of thinking about action, which would be sort of in thinking about question that I posed in our conversation, which what should be the education of colonized people, particularly when they still reside in a country that is originally theirs, when they still reside within a colonized nation state like the United States. And so sort of been lots of debate around that, but this chapter really sort of on what education sort of meant in terms of liberation. Education in this sense was sort of designed to strictly define in the way that we think about school and in the way that we think about literacy practices, so that much like the church served a critical purpose in the early part of colonial America and sort of extending and branching out literacy rates, the church served that same purpose within slavery as well. The church having been the first black-owned institution and being the institution that had the highest investment within both the literacy rate of African people, but seeing those literacy skills and practices being a form of liberation for both progression, for both social mobility, but then also for social uplift. Again, we're about, we didn't read Woodson particular class, but one of the things that Carter G. Wood arguing in the Miseducation of the Negro that he wrote in 1931 should be being read was not sort of just these words or these texts of the Kaiser, but texts that were also giving back to the African community what had been lost in Maafa or the Black Holocaust and the actual sort of era of slavery. The loss of culture, the loss of language. We talked a lot about language beginning of this class and thinking about how language is so tied to worldview, tied to epistemology, about our place within those, how we name ourselves, how we call each other, how we order our world. And so this is when African American English, Black Standard English, or Ibon becomes an important topic, and sort of thinking about, well, cultural traditions have been on, but in a very sort of convoluted way, right? So that sort of becomes important in thinking about this idea that wherever there's existence. So while that culture might not have been being taught sort of in direct ways, didn't mean that it was entirely lost.